I wanted to encourage the fact that as a single person, we have very, very unique challenges and unique benefits. And as a Christian single entrepreneur, I really have been through the ringer, and I want you to know that who you are is so valuable to the kingdom, valuable to the community, valuable to God, and valuable to us as a group. And I want you to really, really receive that. I know that being single as an entrepreneur is challenging enough. Being a Christian entrepreneur is really, really challenging. And when you combine the two together, it can be unbelievably strenuous. However, it doesn't have to stay that way. And I'm really glad to be able to share that with you. Being able to connect with others is so, so important. Enjoying the opportunity to be able to connect with other people and how we build each other up. I wanted to share a little bit about myself and how I ended up even being an entrepreneur, because yes, I am also a pastor. So I tell this story often, and I want you to understand that we all have a story. We all have a story, okay? And your story matters. So when I was about 8 years old, I heard my mom calling me into the living room, and I was raised in an era where you were seen and not heard, and you only spoke when you were spoken to. So I figured I was in trouble for something. And so I walked down the hallway, and I saw my mom. She was leaning up against the door and a wall at the doorway of the living room. And I could see my dad sitting on the couch behind her, behind the newspaper. And so she looks down at me and she says, your dad says that your brother says that your dad's been touching you. Is that true? And I went, yeah. And she looks at my dad and she says, never looks up from the newspaper, doesn't twitch. He says, I don't know what she's talking about. So she looks at me and we have this conversation. And one of these times he says, I don't recall what she's talking about. And I got really mad and I started yelling, like, what do you mean you don't recall? How can you say that it happened? And sadly, the conversation ended. And what I learned in that moment, because of my dad's, that when I have the courage to speak up and stand up for myself, and especially when it's like super important, that it's not going to matter. No one's going to listen. No one's going to hear me. And I ended up with gobs of issues because of that. I learned to live behind a mask and to pretend to be who anybody wanted me to be. And ended up doing years of therapy. And so I tell people, it shouldn't surprise you that I became a licensed marriage and family therapist and an ordained pastor. I just literally became a high-paid codependent. There's a lot of codependents in the world. I just get paid a lot for doing it. And so out of that, I have years of therapy, 11 years of college, and I did personal therapy, professional level therapy for 20 years. And what I noticed is that people would still get stuck. They would still get stuck. And I felt bad as a professional. I'm like, why are these people still getting stuck? And I was sitting on my couch one day, and I wasn't praying. I was just sitting there thinking, why are people getting stuck? And I heard two words. Would you like to know what they are? And I want you to type this in, write this down, and repeat it out loud. Identity abuse. I never heard of physical abuse, sexual abuse. I never heard of identity abuse. What is identity abuse? And what I realized is that my identity was abused. Who God says I was, my identity was abused before I was even old enough to know I had an identity. And that created this long history of just living up to all this other stuff and trying to defend against that identity that wasn't even true, and fighting against these lies. So I went back to work and I was telling all my clients, and I was and I'm like, and I was telling my staff at the church that I was working at, and I'm like, God revealed these two powerful words, identity abuse. And if we think about our identity and why we all have these identity issues, and I'm like, this is just so exciting. And I was like, so excited. I thought everybody needs to hear this, which most entrepreneurs, they go through that. It's like, everybody needs to hear this. And so, but what ended up happening was the message couldn't get out. And it's like, I was working in the church, and I thought, how do I get this message out? And I accidentally, tricked by God, however you want to call it, ended up in this entrepreneurial seminar a year ago, where I met all these people, and they were all acting like they just loved each other, and they'd never even met. They're like, oh, it's so nice to meet you in person. They're all hugging, and I'm like, this is like the weirdest group of people. And then what I realized is they had this online community of Christian entrepreneurs, and they had met, and they were doing this conference. This is like the second conference, and they're all like, you need to join us. I'm like, y'all are kind of weird, until I figured out what it was. And so as time went by, I was trying to connect and trying to get help, because it was all so new to me. I was a therapist and a pastor, so entrepreneurialism was off the hook, new information. And so as I started making more connections, I realized I didn't have anybody who genuinely understood me and my level of need based on the reality of who I am. Because everybody was like so desperate for information. They were connecting, or they would just throw out platitudes. Oh, if you need help with this, go to ClickFunnels, or hire me for another $2,000 to be able to do this. And it was really frustrating. And so what I decided to do was start a group, just a Facebook group, where we can genuinely get to know each other and help each other, and to be able to say, this is my specific area of need, and this is really what I'm looking for, and be able to have conversation about that. And so and the common thread was no one to bounce ideas off of. And so, I was making some clickbait PDF, and there's a lady here in the office, and I shared office space, and I just brought it to her, and I said, hey, can you just look it over and just and find the typos that I miss, and just to have somebody who genuinely cares to, really look it over. And it was great. So I thought, well, what if I created a group where we could just do this, and we could say, all right, I'm doing a challenge, or I'm doing this, or I'm stuck on here, or what kind of platform to use on this, and get to know each other, and their heart. So my BHAG is to help people get to know God. So when I think of, I was called to the ministry before I became a therapist, and but because of my marital status, that couldn't happen because I'm divorced, and it wouldn't happen. So I went into therapy. But my deepest desire is to see people really get to know God well in an emotionally healthy and in a mentally mature way. So I'm using all of these tools to get there, but most people don't know that about me because I work on self-work, and a lot of people need that. But my heart's they'll be able to help us more effectively. So if you go on Facebook and find our group, Christian Single Entrepreneur, I think I'm going to add the Kingdom Solopreneur on there, Kingdom Solopreneur. And join us and let us know how we can help you, pray for you. And hopefully we'll start some regular conferences to be able to actually connect and meet when we get past this particular COVID time. So God bless you. I ask that he just grant you tons of favor in the mission that he has set before you, whether it's doing photography, facials, real estate, doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Because God has given you a passion. I believe he gave you that passion because you are uniquely talented to fulfill that passion. And I pray that he fans that flame, see that come to fruition in your life. And I would love to be able to journey with you in doing that. Alrighty, see you later. Bye.